Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, unleashing growth potential for defense contractors. In today's episode, we continue down the road of understanding CMMC, its regulations, and controls. Up next is CM.L2-3.4.6. Employ the principle of least functionality by configuring organizational systems to provide only essential capabilities. We'll break down what this control means, why it matters, and how it impacts your organization's cybersecurity posture. We'll also provide practical insights and strategies for achieving compliance and securing your systems effectively. So, whether you're a defense contractor aiming to win more contracts or simply someone interested in bolstering your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right place. How's the vector, Victor? We're joined once again by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
And as a lead-in, I try to include as many airplane references as I can, considering that I'm still baffled that you have not seen that movie.
I have not. I haven't, for that matter, I haven't seen snakes on a plane either.
Hey, that's very different, but okay. Um, so Mike, this week we're talking about the principle of least functionality. We've talked about the principle of least privilege before, but this is ever so slightly different. So why is this control important?
Man, this is we were talking a little bit before we started the podcast, and Roman always asks me, he says, is this one a short one or a long one, right? Whenever we're doing controls, is this one with a lot of assessment objectives and there's lots to talk about, or are we, is it not, and it's going to be a short podcast, or we've got to really kind of, stretch it out a little bit, right? Like that's the reality of podcast creation. So when I saw, today was 3.4.6, and we're talking about least functionality, I said, no worries, there's only two objectives, but they're incredibly, incredibly important. It's easy to talk about the importance of this because this is, I think, one of the pillar fundamental controls, and it's kind of tucked away. It's in 3.4. And a lot of people really don't kind of look at this and see how important it is when they're first, kind of cruising through this. But it's in the configuration management family. It's 3.4 was it 3.4.6? And basically, what this is all about is the idea that there's what your people can do with a system, right? What privileges are you giving your people? But then there is another part of it. It's what can your people do? And then this one is what can your systems do? What do they allow for? And I think there might not be anything more important than this control when it comes to the way that the IT director, or, if you're a small company, the IT guy, or if you're a really, really small company, the owner, how do you configure your machines to operate? In micro companies, they will see this control and they'll scratch their head and they'll go, I don't get it. Computer's a computer and it works the way a computer works, and that's that. And I'm the only guy that uses it, so who cares? And they're partially right. But the reality is that they're not right because you might not be the only user of that system. And this is what nobody thinks about unless you're an IT security focused thinker, is you might not be the only person using that system. You may have accidentally allowed a rogue person into your system. Maybe you thought that that was QuickBooks tech support getting into your machine, but that might be someone in a foreign country looking to invade you. So that is a totally different way of thinking than what most people would ever think about with a computer. And so the way that NIST works is you are required to employ this principle of least functionality, which means machines, computers, applications, programs, you name it, they should be configured using only the least amount of function necessary to allow someone to do their job. Huge important principle. Certainly, this is not something that can be done just by documentation and policy alone. It's something that requires technical implementation, and it's very, very important. So, again, the idea is remember somebody, we operate under the principle that somebody could hack you. And if they hack you, what can they do with these systems? And if they cannot take over as administrator very easily and manipulate or change the system to hide their presence, that's a really, really good thing, right? Also, we don't want them allowed to access or rather function in any way that could change other systems or allow deeper levels of access just because they get to your system. And so those are all things that are really mission critical to consider. So that is what employing the principle of least functionality it means. It means configuring your systems so that they can only do the minimum things that are needed to be done so that they can function for the mission of the business. So that's why it's important because remember, the assumption might be, the everyday thinking is I'm the guy that uses this computer, but the security focused thinking is somebody's penetrated the perimeter, they're getting a hand on this computer, how much damage can they do? And that's I got to tell you, that's how ransomware happens, right? Someone invades a computer and they figure out a way using functionality that doesn't really need to be there to access other systems or to escalate permissions or to do all kinds of really nefarious things, ultimately resulting in a ransomware attack or information exfiltration or other really not very friendly things.
All right, so you mentioned that there's only a couple of assessment points or objectives on this one, but that they are vitally important. So what are those assessment points?
Yeah, so the first assessment point is determine if essential system capabilities are defined based on the principle of least functionality. Now, it's got one of our maybe least favorite or most favorite words, depending upon how you think about it, but it's got this word defined, which means it must be documented in writing. So we have to figure out where is it that we're going to define essential system capabilities. So a sample answer might be authorized users are only granted the access and capabilities required to complete currently assigned job duties based on the principle of least functionality. In other words, based on their job duties, they get assigned functionality within the system that is relevant and tied to their job function. They can log into computers, they can access documents on the document drive, they can execute Microsoft Office applications, but they can't go out there and download BitTorrent. They can't go out there and access websites that are inappropriate for work. Those are things that have to be functionality that is restricted from them if it's not applicable to their current job. Authorized users are restricted via permissions. So permissions is a place, and you can obviously go and look at permissions within a file system. That is a place it can be documented. Group policy and system access from any capabilities not authorized by the information owner in the IT ticket requesting system access be granted from the IT team. So again, we have a note about IT tickets that are allowing access to functionality. We have group policy. Again, you should have your group policy documented in some way. I know that we use Network Detective to do that. Network Detective is an incredible program that will allow you to actually have a report of what um, the active group policy is that is actually implemented and restricting functionality. Those are places that you can document. Personally, I think you should also look to the baseline configuration document to see what is the baseline of functionality that is allowed to be configured for most users. So lots and lots of places to look. Every system is definitely going to be different on this one, but most importantly, understand that where you see the word defined, that means that you are going to be looking for some kind of documentation in writing, not necessarily looking in the system, although it can be there, but you're going to have to prove to them via something in writing that you have defined or determined what the essential system capabilities are. So yes, you have to define what a computer can do in a written policy. Um, and then say that it's based on the principle of least functionality. Personally, I usually would put the wording, this is based on the principle of least functionality within that document where it's documented. So that's assessment objective one. Do we have it documented? Two, determine a system is configured to provide only the defined essential capabilities. So first we have to document it and have it in writing. Then they're going to ask you to prove that it is actually configured in such a manner as it is documented. So again, lots and lots of ways to answer this. We say the system is tested on a daily basis by both users and IT administrators to ensure that only essential capabilities exist for all users as a part of daily operations. The IT use and cybersecurity policy requires all system users to immediately report unauthorized access capability. So that's a note that we have about some of our policies. And of course, the baseline configuration policy is a policy that defines what they are allowed to do by default without additional functionalities being defined at the request of the information owner or IT administrator. So really, really good ways to answer that. So again, first we have to document and define, then we have to actually probably give the assessors a little bit of a look into our system and show them some examples of the system being configured to provide only the defined essential capabilities. I think that's pretty easy. Another example of this is if you have antivirus or some kind of endpoint protection system, you might show them that system and show them that it is configured to not allow people, for instance, out to bad websites they shouldn't be accessing and things like that. So yeah, those are some really good examples. That's what the assessors are looking for, and that's definitely how to go out there and solve for that control.
So, what, if any, are the potential difficulties of enacting this particular control in an organization?
Yeah, great question. I think that there's a lot of difficulties in implementing this in reality. The first one is for smaller companies, they're going to say, why do we need a baseline configuration? Why do we need to actually document what we have going on? You can just log in the server and see it. It changes from time to time. Why do I need to have this in documentation? Well, listen, if you're a typical private company, maybe you don't need it in writing. Maybe you can get away without this. But if you have a system that is attacked and they ransomware your system, where did all of your configurations and system settings go? Maybe we can recover it from backup. Maybe we can't. We don't know. Because we all know the first thing attackers are going to go for is they're going to go try to find where the backup is and destroy it. They'll destroy that before they'll ransomware the actively running system. So that is one of the major problems is a lot of people don't consider what happens if they have to stand a system back up from scratch. And it's a problem. So there's that. I think, getting people into the mindset that they have to be documenting all of this stuff, it's a struggle for everybody. Nobody likes that level of documentation. It's a big giant pain in the butt. But the reality is that is a challenge for implementation is you've got to change your culture and understand that, when you're doing work on behalf of the government, it's different. They want you to have everything documented because the only way they can verify that you've got what you say you've got is, of course, if they see the documentation where you've defined it. So there's the documentation portion. Then I think there's also, what is reasonable in terms of functionality? If you're a solo owner, why should you be using a non-administrative account? It's a big giant hassle to escalate permissions every time you want to install software on your own machine, but nonetheless, that's required. Um, there are core operating functional principles around not being a full administrator while you're doing your day-to-day work. It lowers the threat footprint. It makes it more clear when someone is using the administrator account, all those things. It's just something you've got to get used to. So I think there's a cultural adaptation when it comes to this topic as well that I think is really key for understanding. I think that so you got culture, you've got documentation, and then of course there's actually really doing the thing, right? There's the doing of it all, which is how do you actually configure this stuff for least functionality, which is alien to a lot of even mid-sized businesses, right? They just don't have a problem when you've got 1 or 200 employees with somebody doing really nefarious stuff on the computers. Maybe it happens once in a blue moon, you can figure it out. Um, yeah, they're not used to having the systems locked down because maybe they've only got one IT person for 200 employees, and that guy just can't be everywhere all at once. So as a result, you've got a situation where basically they just don't lock down the systems as much as they should. And so I think that's a problem. And then you get into a resource constraint. The more locked down the system is, the more labor you need in order to unlock those systems to be able to do that functionality which is required. So I think for all of those reasons, you really get into a situation where obviously it's easier to just run a system where anybody can do anything, and then you don't have constraints. But from a management perspective, one, far less secure and certainly not allowed when it comes to defense work. And then two, at the end of the day, it's going to cost more money to run an IT system like this because you're going to have people who are managing it. And so as a result, companies may look at this and go, well, there's a cost benefit rate here. And what does that look like? And is it really worth it? And that, I think that's another thing that we really help with at OnCall, which is you can also outsource that kind of thing. We have tons and tons of companies who are great clients of ours who have a great help desk in place. Maybe it's a 1 or 2 person help desk, but they don't have those big, expensive six-figure, multi-six-figure IT folks who are really very expensive and hard to maintain and honestly just need more complex work more often to stay satisfied in their role. Otherwise, they leave. So, it's tough. IT is really tough to insource also because, I'll be honest with you, when you're an IT guy and the company's got to grow from, let's say, 200 to 400 or 500 employees to need that second IT person. Some companies take it on at a smaller size, but there's just not a whole lot of places to go up. if that makes sense, right? There's not a whole lot of value ladder to go up. And so it's more of role expansion. And, sometimes when there's nowhere to go, it's hard to keep IT guys for very many years, especially really talented ones. So I think that, it's getting a little bit outside the scope of the question, but those are things to be considered. And I think also a really wonderful reason why perhaps outsourcing when it comes to getting some help configuring these systems to perform in this least functionality manner, all of a sudden it might really make sense to just transplant a solution like on-calls, ready to go compliant security solutions, transplant that into place, and then you don't have to worry about it. And it's certainly a fraction of the cost. So lot going on there. But there are some challenges. And I think for most mid-sized companies that are 2 to 500 employees or less, outsourcing could solve for a lot of those challenges.
Absolutely. And if you've been with us for a while now, you know how we like to wrap this up. We like to take the topic of compliance, which can be a bit dry sometimes, and spice it up with a bit of a silly question that we don't take this question at face value. It's just for fun, but Mike is very good at making it relevant to the topic, which is why we're still doing it 84 episodes later. So, in the name of the silly question, this week's silly question is as follows. In the spirit of the famous philosophical bend, is the glass half empty or half full? And we're talking about the principle of least functionality. Does that then mean that least functionality leans more towards half empty?
Mm, that's a good one. That's a good one. Let me think about that for a minute.
And for anyone listening while Mike thinks about that, I've just accomplished the goal that I always try to accomplish with these silly questions, and it's to stump Mike even for the briefest of seconds.
No, this is a really good, because I am a philosophical person, and I use the glass half full versus glass half empty analogy all the time, because I feel like, one of the things about being a growth mindset entrepreneur, which is what I consider myself, is everything to me is a glass half full. But that's not what we're asking about here. We're not asking about my outlook on life. We're asking about the idea of functionality being restricted, and is that a glass half full or glass half empty? And I think the answer is there are real pros and cons to this. On the glass half full side of things, security is paramount, and so to implement these principles is something that, in my opinion, overweighs the glass half empty perspective that you're restricting users from being able to freely move about, do what they need to do to get their job done. And I think, if you're a small company, let's say that you're under 30 to 50 people, I think this is a glass half empty scenario. I truly believe that. I think that it's constrictive. You may not have the resources to really execute this well, but you are forced to because of compliance. So you've got to kind of mature past a reasonable point by law. And it's not a good thing. It restricts creativity. It restricts empowering employees, which is what you've got to do when you're small, so they can wear multiple hats and be able to really operate at a high level because their jobs are not really, really specialized. However, when you start surpassing that 50 to 60 employee mark, I am an advocate that I think this is a real glass half full kind of thing, because past that number of employees, past that number of computers, and a system is much more easily weaponized. You cannot control what everyone clicks on, and you have to restrict the system more and more and more to really make it so that people are not abusing the system. And in that respect, it becomes glass half full. So I think that there's kind of a loser and a winner on this one. I think the loser is the smaller micro-sized business that, honestly, guys, what's interesting about being around 30 employees like OnCall is we kind of understand, we're like walking that balance between, a mid-sized company and a little bit larger company, right? We're starting to see some things in our own business that are requiring us to act larger, and yet we still have this high growth entrepreneurial mentality. Everybody needs to be empowered to the max type of thing so that we can really deliver the absolute best service experiences for our clients. And man, I really hate taking freedoms away from our team members, right? I want them to be able to do what they need to do without continually having to escalate through higher ranking, superior people in the company to get things done. So to me, the small companies are the loser. They're the glass half empty type folks. And I understand it's frustrating. I think a lot of this compliance is frustrating, but the mission that you're serving, which is defense, and making sure that the information you're entrusted with, it just simply outweighs the inefficiencies. By the way to stop being so small is to get those profit margins up and make it worth your while to go through these restrictions. Highly relevant. I would love to show you how to do that, right? We've got a whole team that has a process that we can use to show defense contractors how to get those profit margins up. Only company in the world that does that that I know of. And we've been doing it for a lot of years, very successfully. And then I think, again, for the larger companies, it's a stark reminder that one, you're required to do it by law anyway, and two, if you want to scale, if you want to grow, you're going to have to ultimately use systems that don't allow for wasteful actions. That they can create insider threat, they can create all kinds of bad stuff happening. So I think for those folks, it's all positive, right? They probably should have already had this kind of thing implemented already. Yeah. Great question. I love that. I love that because a lot of these security principles, they do apply differently to different size companies. I think OnCall is highly unique in that we routinely work with companies who are one or two or five people. And honestly, we have a lot of billion-dollar plus companies that we work with as well on compliance because we are a thought leader and a market leader in this segment. And it's a really interesting juxtaposition to work with companies that are so wide-ranging in size. All of them are defense contractors. We don't work with anyone who's not a defense contractor anymore on this side of the house. So I think that to me is something that is a very interesting thing. Now here's the best part, right? If you're a small company and you're getting with this, all right, we want to help you go win more business and grow, and you won't be small anymore, right? So we can help you make that transition from glass half empty to glass half full. And that might maybe be some of my most favorite things.
And that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever evolving world of defense. We'd like to extend our appreciation to Mike for joining us and giving us valuable information about the principle of least privilege. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Roman.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us on our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, they should definitely like, subscribe, and boy, tell a friend. You know what? We're going to do some amazing things here in 2025. We're stoked to have you on this journey with us. CMMC is real, and you know what? All the crazy critical updates, they're going to come through the channel.
You know what else we're going to do in 2025?
Tell me about it.
We're going to hit 100 episodes in 2025, and it's all because of our listeners like you. And as Mike said, speaking of those listeners, please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss new episodes like this one. You'll want to be there for 100. We still got several weeks before we get there, but we will get there in 2025. We'd also appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the show. It is your feedback that helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.